Hello and welcome to the West Yorkshire Football Show. I'm Stephen Brown and joining me is Jason Booker. And this is going to be the first of what we hope is a long-running series on the channel called the Leeds United Debate, where we take a look at certain issues at Leeds United, whether it be focusing on one player or one event or those agonising sliding door, what could have been moments for the club. So first up, we're focusing on Joe Gelhardt and asking whether his future still lies at Ellen Road. And please do give the video a like, and if you're watching live, get involved in the debate by getting your comments in. Or if you're watching this later, please let us know what you think. So we're going to get into this. Joe Gelhardt, Jason, boy wonder, signed from Wigan in 2020 as an 18-year-old. Very exciting prospect. Was he someone who was on your radar? Because I think I'd seen him on like a few editions of FM for a couple of years, and he was kind of noted as this kind of boy wonder, the next big thing, Rooney-esque when he was at Wigan. And I remember when we signed him, I was like, oh, I've heard of him. And that could be quite exciting. Was he on your radar kind of that long ago, Jason, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, when the kind of proverbial hit the fan at Wigan, he was actually playing a huge part in that team that got relegated. I think it was Paul Hart that was the manager. Players weren't getting played, and Joffrey basically found himself in a position at about 17, being actually asked to play up front for Wigan as they battled against relegation, and they almost survived, if you remember. That Wigan team almost pulled off a bit of a miracle. And that season, I think he maybe had appeared something like 15, 20 times, I want to say, something like that, mainly off the bench. And he'd played his part, scored a couple of goals, and I remember seeing a few highlights of him, harassing defenders and, having moments in games which were like, this lad's got some talent. And when we picked him up for what were an absolute snip, and I'd still consider, regardless of what's happened, since, £1 million for that kind of potential, you'd probably recoup your money even now, if we were to sell him. So I was certainly excited when we picked him up, and a lot of people were like, "Oh, vultures! They've gone to Wigan and picked this player up, their prized asset, the biggest potential for £1 million." Well, that's what happens, unfortunately, and that's what happens to these teams that are lower down the ladder, especially when there's money troubles. It happened to us several times over throughout the year. So yeah, I were made up when we went and acquired him and put him in the under-23s.
Yeah, absolutely. And this leads on to the next point, his impact in that under-23 teams, Jason. I mean, he was phenomenal, wasn't he? I mean, I would hire Bob over and watch Joe Gelhardt's under-23 goals, because it was in the Amazon documentary as well, where it was showing all these kind of best goals from his time in the academy. And it was just some absolute world beaters. I mean, you watched the under-23s around that time regularly. I mean, what stood out to you for him?
I watched him a lot. I mean, that team was sensational, to be fair. We were probably a little bit out of position in terms of the structure at the time. We were in the second division, I think it was, or maybe even the third division. I can't remember, of the 23 structure. And truthfully, the recruitment that we'd gone out and done, it put us in a position where we really should have steamrolled the league, and we ended up doing that. The likes of Sam Greenwood, Cody Drameh, Charlie Cresswell, Noah Kenner, Cree Somerville, like there were literally bags of them. Even the likes of McKinstry, McCarran, some of these that were on the fringes of the first team under Bielsa, they were playing, big parts. Jack Jenkins was in that team as well, and they were playing big parts in that squad. And Gelhardt and Greenwood, especially, had formed a real partnership together, and it was potent. They were banging in goals for fun. They were way beyond Cree at the time. They were beyond Amari Miller as well. Amari Miller was another one in and around that kind of crop. The best of the bunch, I've said this before, was Cody Drameh, but with him aside, Sam Greenwood and particularly Joe Gelhardt were the two that stood out. Gelhardt really put himself on the map as being a fox in the box. He was always in and around that 6-yard box, finishing off chances, scoring goals, bullying defenders, using his strength, his ability to be able to send defenders one way and then cut back in on his left side, especially score goals. But he was strong with both feet as well. His movement was fantastic. And at that level, you know, what we will probably come on to is some of his deficiencies. His deficiencies weren't as prevalent because of the level of players that he was operating against. Certainly, his strength was fun to watch. He bullied defenders. It was likened to Wayne Rooney a lot, wasn't it? Because of the side link, and I think his stocky size and nature as well probably gave him that likeness too. So yeah, when he first came on the scene in the 23s, he were ripping it up for fun.
Yeah, absolutely, and he eventually got his chance, albeit cameo appearances for Leeds United. And I mean, the first kind of memorable moment for him in the first team was winning the penalty against Wolves, which brought Leeds back to 1-1 in that game in the 21-22 season, I believe. I watched it back actually because I'd not seen it for a while on the highlights, and he looks phenomenal. So there's a chance that he has where he gives a little give and go. I think it's to Click possibly. And then he smashes this shot and the keeper just manages to get a fingertip to it and it goes over. And it's such an electric performance. And then a few minutes later, a little give and go, a dribble around a player, dribble around another player, darting into the box, direct, and wins a penalty. And Leeds get a point. Rodrigo smashes home the penalty. I mean, when I remember how I felt when I saw that at the time, I thought, wow. I mean, we'd heard all about Joffrey. We'd seen the under-23 videos. And when you saw that performance, Jason, I mean, not to be unfair to other players, but for example, particularly in that team at that time, Tyler Roberts, for example, got a lot of opportunities under Bielsa in that time. And I don't recall him ever making an impact like Joffrey did in probably 15 minutes or whatever it was against Wolves. I mean, when you saw him in that game, Jason, and when you saw what he did, I mean, just how excited were you at that time? And did you think, actually, this is a guy who can step up from that under-23s and actually replicate in the first team as well?
100%. I think right from the second that he arrived at Leeds, the hope was that he would be able to make the step up and play first team football and make first team starts. So often youngsters come through the channels and fans are like, oh, give them a go, put them in. And it's not really realistic. With Gelhardt, that wasn't the case. It was a case that he wasn't far away from being first team ready. And he'd also then been able to come on and affect games, which, you know, so often doesn't happen for a substitute. However, once the unknown is then known, it does become a little bit more tricky. I think history is littered with youngsters that have made an impact off the bench in a short period of time, been electric. I think of the likes of Franny Jeffers at Arsenal, Jermaine Pennant did the same at Arsenal. There's a few that are they still had great careers. But when they first came on the scene, it was like this burst of, oh my God, who's this kid? And then they naturally find their role in the pecking order and they go back to, or they settle in the position that they're in. And I think Gelhardt is probably in and amongst that list of players that did that for Leeds. When he first came on the scene, defenders did not know how to deal with him. He was electric. He was ready to go. He was using all of his natural skills and assets to his best disposal. And it did make a big difference. I mean, there's an argument to say that without him in the season that we finished under Jesse Marsh, without him, we go down. But there is a very, very strong argument to say that that's the case. He was that important in them vital moments.
Yeah, absolutely. And a couple of other highlights from that same season. And we will chat about kind of Bielsa's role in this as well. But talking about those good moments, I mean, a memorable winner against Norwich and a fantastic bit of improvisation against Brighton at home to set up Pascal Stroik's equaliser, which was absolutely crucial. And for me, when you looked at him, he had that, you know, we hear this phrase, street footballer, which is kind of, it plants that idea in your mind. It's a footballer who's raw, who can be inventive on the pitch, who's rugged, who's streetwise, and can come up with these moments of inspiration. And that's what we thought we had with Joffrey, and he certainly proved so in those moments. Is there an argument that Bielsa didn't use him properly? Because I remember there was a lot of fans, myself included, who I felt like I was banging my head against the wall going, why is this guy not getting more of a chance? For me, Patrick Bamford was already kind of off it that season. To be honest, he wasn't quite where he'd been the previous year. Tyler Roberts was it was difficult for Tyler. You know, he struggled to make that impact in the Premier League. And here you have this kid who is coming on and he's exciting and he's having these moments in games. And he just didn't seem to get an opportunity. And one of the arguments labelled against Bielsa and also kind of that's been noted for Joffrey later on is the fact that because that momentum wasn't allowed to kind of continue or it wasn't encouraged and he didn't get more and more game time, it kind of has dented his confidence and he's never really recovered. I mean, how do you see how Bielsa managed Gelhardt and that whole situation?
I think it's a super tricky one. And I don't think that any opinion that you will hear or cast about this situation is right or wrong. I think it's just an opinion and I think they're all probably fair. I think at the end of the day, there's only 11 players that can start a football game. And as a manager of a team, you have to go with your gut and make informed decisions based on the situation. In my opinion, there's a few things that I'll drop at Joffrey's door as to why the impact halted. We've seen less, slowed down. We've not seen the full potential. Whatever you want to call it. Number one is injuries. Yeah. I would say his injury record is a real problem. It was a problem at 23 level as well. There was times when he had almost got to that first team level through his 23 performances, and then he'd be dropped out of the squad because of an injury, little knock, whatever it was. There were times where he'd made an impact off the bench. He wasn't then available for the next game because of an injury. And that, it's unfortunate. Some players are more prone to getting injuries than others. The way that they play the game can sometimes have that impact as well. Some it's just unfortunate, natural. It's in their body. I'm quite naturally injury prone kind of player. When I played, I found myself like having injuries all the time, and that's just the way that it is sometimes. The second, and I'd say the most vital or most potent reason as to why he's got a problem is his position. What is his position? And I think that this is a real problem for Joe Gelhardt, not just at Leeds, but in general. When he was obviously loaned out to Sunderland, it was the idea that he would come in and play as a second striker to Stewart, which then unfortunately wasn't able to happen because Stewart got injured and Gelhardt was then left to be playing the sole 9 role on his own. Very rare do teams play 2 strikers nowadays. It doesn't happen very often. So this kind of second striker, shadow striker position that he probably would be best suited to doesn't really exist in most teams and tactics. So then you're trying to incorporate him in as a 10 or as a 7, maybe to cut in onto his left foot. But truthfully, whenever we've seen him play in them positions, it doesn't affect games in the way that he should. So, them being said, it shows really why he's then stalled. And the third kind of case that I wanted to make for why he's not kind of progressed and maybe why, not so much Bielsa because Bielsa had gone by this point, but why he's kind of stalled at Leeds is the Sunderland loan didn't go particularly well. Sure, he was brought in to play a particular role and then that role had to change, but he still played 15 games or so for Sunderland, scored 2 goals. I think he got maybe 1 or 2 assists. And he didn't really have the impact that we was hoping that he would have in a team that were hoping to get promoted in the Championship. I remember watching him against Luton. He had a nothing game, came off after about 60 minutes. Didn't have the impact in them big moments that you needed him to have. You think back to the games that he started for Leeds. I think a Tottenham away, don't get me wrong, it's a difficult role and environment to go into, but he had a poor game when he was asked to start. So what chances do you then give him? You give him the moments off the bench when, he did make impact when he first hit the scene, but even them impacts, you think of Salford away earlier on this season, got opportunity, didn't have a great game. So where does the blame lie, Browney,
Yeah, I know what you mean. And the strange thing for me was after Bielsa leaves, Marsh comes in and Joffe has an impact at the end of the season, like we mentioned with the Brighton, and he signs this big new 5-year deal. So he signs that at the end of the 22 season. And it's a 5-year massive deal to 2027. There's, glowing publicity about him on the website. And I think I probably thought at that point, this is going to explode for him now. And it just never started for Jesse, for Gelhardt under Jesse Marsh. I mean, I think he started him once. And I think you were right. I think in the limited appearances, particularly that season, he was really disappointing. There was numerous games that well, not numerous. He's never had that many opportunities. But when he did it, for me, you weren't seeing the things that we know he can deliver or that we'd seen in those glimpses before. And that's when you start to kind of worry a little bit about where this is heading. He signed this big deal. You're expecting him to kick on. The injuries are a nightmare because you're absolutely right. He gets an opportunity, or I think I remember one particular game he was kind of being talked up as starting all week and then got an injury on the Thursday. And it's like, or even probably the day before, the Friday, you just think, oh, what a shame. I would love to see him, be given that time. But yeah, there were a couple of strange ones. I remember one, I think it was a cup game, and for whatever reason, he was played as the centre forward and Matteo Joseph was played on the wing. And it was like, why are you playing? I think it was Marsh, and it was just like, why are you doing that?
It was Crew at home, wasn't
it? Yeah, and it
was
just
Crew at home.
It was really frustrating, and I felt for Joffe a little bit then because I just felt like I just don't understand. I would love to have seen him in a proper second striker role.
The worst thing about that day was that we were awful. It was 0-0 until about the 70th minute. We had to bring Bamford off the bench to change the game, and he completely changed the game. And he should do. He's a Premier League striker up against League One opposition or whatever Crew at the time, League Two opposition maybe even. And he came on and he totally changed the game when we ended up winning 1-0. And that kind of then further exasperated the fact that the step between Gelhardt and Bamford for that 9 role was so big. And I don't think he's a 9. I think it's one of the biggest problems that kind of follows him, but he doesn't have the pace to play 7. I think he's probably best positioned is a second striker, but like I said a couple of minutes ago, teams don't play it anymore. And then I think you're then left with putting him in as a 10. But would you play like if right now, if Rutter got injured or Pirro got injured, would you think of Gelhardt? You wouldn't.
No.
You'd probably think of putting Cree in there and bringing one of the wingers in. If that wasn't an option, you'd think of Nonto. If that wasn't an option, you'd probably think of Poveda before Gelhardt, from what we've seen of Gelhardt as a 10. So I think it's a real tricky one now. And I do think it's a combination of everything that we've just mentioned as resulted in this position. Injuries are a real problem for him, because it makes him unreliable for us as well. Like we never know whether we can pick him the next week or not. We don't know whether his form will be able to carry over. The 23s had the same situation though. You go back and have a look. There were big gaps in between where Gelhardt were missing and Greenwood would then play up front and move out of the midfield. Or somebody else had come in there. Max Dean played a lot in that team. He'd come in and play up there instead. So
no, exactly. And when we got into that last season in the Premier League, we'd signed someone called Willie Nonto as well, who became the next hot prospect, really kind of took over that role from Joffe. We also signed Jorginho Rutter in the January as well for 35 million. And all of a sudden, this guy that you've given a 5-year contract to, you're touting him out for loans, which I think suited everybody. And like you've mentioned earlier, he went to Sunderland and it never caught fire. He was unlucky with, obviously, the situation that he was going to be the second striker, but obviously it didn't quite happen because of Stewart's injury. How he kind of left it on Wearside, it like you say, it wasn't like he smashed it. And then he was coming back to Leeds, who were then going to be in the Championship, and be like, I'm your main man. If he'd have tore it up at Sunderland, Jason, and got, 15 goals and 15 assists, or maybe not that many if he was there from January, but you know what I mean? If he'd have played really out of his skin and, picked up 10, 12 goal, efforts, I mean, it could have been different, couldn't it? You could have been coming back then when Leeds are in the Championship going, this guy is Championship ready, but it didn't necessarily even look like that, really, did it?
You know what, though, Brownie? I think there was a period of time where the squad was transitioning and we were getting it all together, where if Gelhardt had asserted himself in them positions, I think he'd have played. I do think that Daniel Farke would have given him chances.
Yeah.
And, them chances have diminished and disappeared more and more. He was still getting brought on earlier on in the season, even when he weren't starting. And even they've gone now. We saw Poveda get minutes the other day. Not the last game, the game before. He came off the bench. And I mean, to be behind Ian Poveda, who was on loan at Blackpool the season before, is just well, it's not good for where you clearly are in the pecking order. So yeah, I think that role was there for him. I think his last chance was against Salford, and he was really poor that day.
Yeah,
it was really, really poor that day. He had so many chances to take. If he'd have scored 1 or 2 that day, who's to say that he wouldn't have got to start the next league game? Maybe. So football's brutal. It's brutal, and you don't get too many second chances, especially when you're that age. Like teams, Danny Farke can't afford it. He can't afford to be playing somebody in there that's just not delivering the goods.
No, he's also lost a big supporter at the club, Victor Orta. So Victor Orta had Joe Gelhardt pegged as his wonder kid, his kind of this brilliant prospect, and obviously Orta's left the club, so there's not that director of football there, kind of. Because I certainly think Orta influenced giving him a 5-year contract. He was a big believer in Joe Gelhardt, and you've lost that big influence at the club who's backing him up, supporting him. And you wonder who is left at the club who really can take over that role, and if there is anyone who's going to be like that. I mean, we saw Joffe in the Shrewsbury game in the Cup, and he was disappointing again.
Yeah.
And that was before the Salford game. That was an opportunity then, and it was just so disappointing. And when I look back at the Wolves game, the Brighton game, that sharpness, that cleverness, and that's in the Premier League, by the way, as well. That's not in the Cup against League One opposition. You're just you're scratching your head and wondering where it's gone.
Just on that, sorry to interrupt you.
No, go for it.
Like, I think it's really important that we because you're absolutely right that he's almost street football, and the problem with that is it sustainable week in, week out to be able to do that unless you are like supremely talented? Even an Adel Taarabt couldn't do that week in, week out at Premier League level. And I would say he's probably the most street football kind of player I can think of off the top of my head. Zaha maybe is similar. It's very difficult to sustain that. And when you're coming off the bench for the first time, teams are tired. Often, he did it at home as well when the crowd was behind him. And he had them key moments where teams were up against it and he found them inspirational moments of brilliance. Is that a sustainable kind of pathway for a first team level player at Premier League level or even Championship level? I'm not sure that it is.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. When you look at those under 23 players, his group with him, why has Somerville gone from strength to strength, and whereas Joffe has kind of slowed down? Because there's been times when Somerville's been out with injuries. I mean, is it just their talent ceiling, or I mean, what is it? Do you think that's kind of made that Somerville's pushed on and Joffe hasn't?
It's a great question. It's a really, really good question. I think Cree especially has some real natural abilities that are transferable to men's first team football really, really well, i.e. his pace. He's blisteringly quick. And he's also got a defined position and role within a first team Championship Premier League team, whereas Gelhardt doesn't. He has neither. He has neither of them things. I've said this before about Gelhardt. He's not exceptional at anything. He's very good at a lot of things, or he's good at a lot of things, but he's not exceptional at anything, which makes him really difficult to place. Like, he's not tall enough or strong enough to be an out-and-out 9 in any Championship or Premier League team, really. He's just not. He's not quick enough to play on the wing. He's not tricky enough to play at 10. He's not intelligent enough with his little intricate passing it to play as a 10. He's a good enough finisher to be as a 9. I do think he's a naturally talented finisher. The problem with him is he hasn't got all them other ingredients to then play that 9 role. So I think it's really, really tricky to fit him in anywhere, mate. And I think that's the big difference between him and Cree's a great example of a player that's kind of pushed on. Even a Sam Greenwood, me and you have both said we think letting Greenwood go was a bit of a mistake in terms of, I think he'd have played a position in the squad, certainly long term in terms of what he can progress into. And we've seen that Greenwood has them the ability to play in a 10 role and be moulded in and improve some of his natural abilities in terms of the way that he carries the ball, his passing, his set piece taking, because that does make a part, of what Sam Greenwood can provide. Gelhardt just doesn't have them in exceptional bits. He's shown moments of brilliance in flashing substitute appearances, but nothing that's tangible to bring him in and play him week in, week out as a starter.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess that leads us, and we will be responding to your comments shortly. We really appreciate you getting your comments in, guys. The future for Joffy, is it another loan? We've got the January transfer window coming up on the horizon. Can he muscle his way in, Jason? Or is it even a permanent exit, potentially, do you think?
I would imagine that the next move that Gelhardt makes, even if it is on the face of it alone, will end up being the last we see of Joe Gelhardt. Unfortunately, I would imagine that would be the case. I can imagine a loan to buy to a Middlesbrough or a Sunderland or somebody of that kind of ilk that would be prepared to take a chance on progressing his potential, because he's still definitely got potential. He's got time on his hands. I just think any team that takes him on is going to have to really start defining where they see his future and start nailing that down, because I don't think we've helped with that. Try him at 10, try him at 9, try him at 7, like move him around a bit. I don't think we've helped with that. And the process that we've gone through over the last 2-3 seasons hasn't helped him either. But I would imagine in January we'll probably see him move on. And it'll be disappointing. Not that I think it's the wrong decision, because I think we're probably at that point now where it is the right thing for him, the right thing for us to probably cut ties and move on. But in terms of the raw potential that we did see there, it will be disappointing. But even I can't answer where I think he would fit in and where we would play him. In pre-season, I saw that he could maybe potentially have a role as a 10, but having seen him there and, comparing to the likes of what we're doing at the moment, even Somerville in the 10, Pirro, Rutter, an out-and-out 10, like we could go and sign an out-and-out 10 for 4 or 5 million quid. That would be 20 times the number 10 that Gelhardt would be right now for us. So then what do? Do we suffer ourselves to kind of try and force him in? You don't do that.
No, it's tough. And I think this one does hurt if it doesn't work out for Gelhardt at Leeds. It really does, because I was so excited by his potential. And it's gutting, really, because I think there is a player there, and I think a bit of a unique player that you don't get all the time. The only way I can see him getting any minutes is if maybe Nonto leaves and he goes a place up that pecking order, and maybe a couple of injuries, if a Cree, Jorginho gets injured, Pirro, a couple of them get injured, which is feasible in a long 46-game season. Maybe he can kind of, get up that pecking order and get some more minutes, maybe even get a few starts. That's the only way I can see.
How many injuries would there have to be, though?
I know.
In the nicest possible way.
Even Paveda now would have to get injured for him.
There'd have to be so many players that were unavailable for Gelhardt to even be really in question for minutes off the bench, let alone starting. So I think it's a real tough one. Yeah. I can imagine that Gelhardt will probably end up dropping down to League One to rebuild. There might be some teams at the bottom of the Championship that'll take a chance on him, but the problem with him is, where would he fit in? Say, for example, a Rotherham. You can't be carrying a Gelhardt up front in a Rotherham. You need somebody with blistering pace or blistering strength, and he's got neither. So I would imagine, a Derby, or when Ipswich were in League One and dominating, I would imagine that he'll probably end up filling in there and rebuilding and coming back. And I do think he'll probably have a successful career at Championship level. I personally right now don't see how he will progress enough to become a Premier League player week in, week out. I just don't see it.
No, I think it's looking. For me, because of the length of his deal, I would like to see it be a loan rather than permanent, because I'm holding on to that kind of glimmer of hope that he can be the player we all thought he was going to be. I would absolutely love for it to turn around for him. I would, he's only 20. So there is time. I would absolutely love it if it turned around for him. I really would, because he's a type of player that I love to watch and get excited by. But like you say, we can't afford to carry anyone. We can't give sympathy minutes out to players. It's got to be cutthroat, and it did have opportunities to impress earlier in the season, whether it be pre-season or Carabao Cup games. There were opportunities there, so potentially, certainly the ship has sailed in this season. I think that's done. I think it'll be a loan move in January. I'm not ready to say a permanent bye-bye to Joffrey, though. I really would love to see it work out in some way, shape or manner if he has an exceptional loan period somewhere. But I know what you mean. I hear you, and I do think you're probably right ultimately where it will end up. But I live in hope. I live that there's still an opportunity for him at Leeds. I really do. I hope so. Well, let's get to some of your comments then. Really appreciate all you guys getting involved.
Just while it's on my mind, I remember how despondent he looked against Shrewsbury at home. Do you remember watching him first half and just think he just looked miserable? And then he ended up scoring that game because the ball cannoned back off him and went in, didn't it? Do you remember? Yeah. And he didn't even really celebrate it that much. And then I don't think he came off. I think he got hooked not so long after. And I just think, sorry.
It's just that I know do you know what it is with him? Sometimes, it's that thing. It's just never quite got going, has it? After those early appearances and after that particular season,
sometimes it don't. Brownie, look at Cody Drameh. Cody Drameh was, but in my opinion, he was head and shoulders above anybody else in that 23 team. And Greenwood and Gelhardt were both fantastic, but Drameh was fantastic. And every time he got an opportunity at Leeds, he bombed. Wasn't given that many, but clearly wasn't doing it in training either. Several managers said that he weren't, he's their guy, and Ayling was their guy. And he went to Cardiff and did a great job. And he went to who else did he go to? Luton and did a great job, and then he ends up at Birmingham. I'm not really sure how he's doing this season. I think they've had such transition with going from a good manager to Wayne Rooney. So I think I don't know how he's now getting on, but he's clearly a championship level fullback. But we decided that Luke Ayling was better, and I trust Daniel Farke. So what must he have been showing at Leeds? And it's just sometimes the way it goes for players. They don't always, the face don't always fit.
No. What was it? The pre-season game where Cody Drameh, or a league game? I can't remember, where he just literally passed it to the other team.
It was when he came on left back and then got hooked at half time, didn't it? Was it Ipswich? It was Ipswich away.
Yeah, it's just like, what is happening?
It was Ipswich away, and he came on because Byram got injured, I think it was. Yeah. Then he got hooked at half time after being on about 15 minutes, and Jamie Shackleton played left back. That's what happened.
Oh my goodness me, shocking. Okay, let's get to your comments then, and we'll have a little chat about what you're saying here. Gail, thank you for your comment, love. Must admit, thought Joe would make it, but not now. And I think that's what it is. That's how I feel. I was so certain. I would have bet anything on Joe Gelhardt to make it for Leeds United when I saw him explode on the scene. I really would. I would never have bet that it would have got to this situation. I think even last year when he went on loan to Sunderland, I still thought ultimately his future lies with Leeds, but no, not to be, unfortunately.
The Norwich moment were my favourite.
Oh,
the flick on, the Rafinha touch and take around the keeper, the cross, and then the finish. And the jubilant celebration was just immense, because it was, if you watch the celebration of it, you can't help him just feel like he's just a kid in his bedroom, like pretending he scored in FA Cup final. He just loses the plot, doesn't he? He just loses the plot. But
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that as well, Gail. When Joe was linking up with Rafinha, he seemed to be doing well. Kevin, now can you imagine what it does for you playing with a player at Rafinha's level? I mean, you're going to look a lot better, aren't you, when you've got that man setting you up for 94th minute winners like that, or whatever it was. Absolutely. What a player. I know, ridiculous. Did he play for us? God.
I know. I think he kept us up single-handedly that season, really, didn't he? What a player.
Kevin Gelhardt is also injury prone. Indeed, yeah. I mean, we've seen that, and that is just something that they can't help. You just what can you do about that? Some players are just cursed with that, aren't they? Really,
lots of soft tissue injury. Yeah. Lots of soft tissue injuries. Twisted ankle, pulled this, pulled that. It's frustrating. I mean. And I mean this nicely. Some players can deal with them injuries better than others. Some players get them after a Saturday and are okay to play on the Wednesday. Some are just not. They're out for 2 weeks. Because players get them all the time. The highly tuned athletes and things like that go all the time. So I'm not calling him out for saying that he's not okay. But too many times there were two just little niggly injuries that kept him out of the side when he really needed to be available for him and for his career.
Absolutely. Diggler, thanks for your comment, mate. Okay, I'm being honest here. Joffe isn't good enough there. I said it, just my opinion. I know. And that's the tough thing, isn't it? When you see an exciting player burst on the scene and it just doesn't look like they're quite going to cut it. Kevin, thanks again for your comment, mate. I'd rather play Joseph ahead of Gelhardt. And a bit of a curious one with Joseph as well, because he's kind of fallen off the scene a little bit. But, I mean, are you in agreement with Kevin there? Would you probably put Joseph ahead of Gelhardt now if you were one or the other bringing on?
I think yeah, just simply because we've now got he's a new potential and we need to see what he's got at first team level. I don't think we've seen enough of him to really say whether that's true or not. We can only take what we've heard and seen at 23 level and stuff like that. So I would say yeah, but I think it's hard to say that he's ahead of Joffe based on what we've seen at first team level at the moment. It's very similar to when Gelhardt first came on the scene at Leeds. Is the position that Jose finds himself in now. But we could do a segment and a stream all on the youngsters that we've got in the squad now, couldn't we?
Yeah, absolutely, indeed, definitely. And Diggler again here. I would sell him. I feel terrible to say that, but that is what it's like. It's horrible. I mean, I'm not ready for a sale. I've got to admit, I'm not ready for a sale, especially if it's like a Sam Greenwood 1.5 million type of agreement. No, I'm not ready for that. Absolutely. Not ready to commit to that. And what we've kind of touched upon before as well, Dav, I don't know if you've just joined late, mate, but please catch up with the rest of the show. I think you'll enjoy what we've been saying. But what's his best position? Jason covered this brilliantly as well. The fact that we don't know really. I mean, he's kind of been played here, there, and everywhere.
I think it's his biggest problem. I honestly think it's his biggest problem. But I also understand why it's a problem for him and for managers because of his skill set. You think about what he can offer a team. Where do you put him? Considering the fact that most teams only play one striker, where do you play him?
Yeah,
and I run out of options to then play him in front of anybody, even as a second or third choice. Like if Dan James is coming off, right? Okay, I'm looking at my bench. Okay, no, Joffe, you sit down. I'm bringing on Nonto, or I'm bringing on Jadon Anthony. They're far more capable in them positions, right? Okay, they're both not available, right? Okay, so I'm looking at Paveda or I'm looking at Gelhardt to play on the wing. Right, no, I'm going to go Paveda. It's a bit quicker. Is it? Yeah. And then at that point you think, well, so he's what, fourth or fifth choice to play right wing or 10, and I do the same thing at 9. Like if Rutter's injured, right? Okay, we'll play Pirro up there. We move somebody else into 10. Right, Pirro's injured. Right, I'd turn to Bamford. I would turn to Bamford over. Right, Bamford's injured. He's out as well. Right, I turn to Joseph because Joseph's a bit quicker than Gelhardt. Then I get to Gelhardt. That's where I'm at. So it's tough.
Yeah, no, absolutely, definitely is. Alison here, is Joffe playing in the under-23s? Great question, actually. I mean, what's been happening? He's not, is he? No, he's kind of just been. Well, I mean, he's been injured, hasn't he, for so long? What did he do? Did he break his wrist or something? Or what was the latest one? It was something, wasn't it, that kind of kept him out for kind of a period of time.
Because he's not even been on England duties, has he?
No, he's not even been on England duties at all. No, absolutely. Good stuff. Well, we've covered quite a lot there about Joe Gelhardt. Guys, if you want to know when our streams are, anything like that, we are on Twitter as well. If you guys have a Twitter account, please do give us a follow on that. It's at W Yorks Football, and that's the West Yorkshire Football Show, and you'll be following along. You'll know when all our streams are happening. So please give the video a like if you've enjoyed this content. This is a series that we hope to bring to you once a week. It's going to be about different topics around Leeds United. Please get your suggestions in there as well. If you follow us on the Facebook page, Twitter page, or get your comments in on the videos, what would you like to see me and Jason discuss? Because we'll literally talk about anything Leeds United. It's absolutely fine. But please do like the video if you've enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel to get more content on Leeds United and our other teams across West Yorkshire. I've been Stephen Brown. With me has been Jason Booker. Jason, thank you very much.
Thank you, mate. Thank you. Good as always.
And we'll see you again shortly. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.